If you ever buy anything from Apple, you should use Wikibuy. It's a browser extension that automatically.
Welcome to r/petty revenge, where no revenge is too small. Having dinner with my family, this story was brought up that I think belongs here with a mix of justice served. This happened to a family friend, let's name him Sean. His parents are American, but he lived in South America when he was born. He was also raised there naturally, so he grew up speaking perfect Spanish, though he obviously didn't look Hispanic. Blonde, green eyes, fair skin, etc. Fast forward a couple decades. He's now in his late 20s and moved back to the US, where he's lived since his teens. So both his Spanish and English are perfect at this point. He goes to a certain Mexican fast food place, let's call it E. coli, where employees add your ingredients down the line and you pay at the end. As soon as he starts ordering his food, two of the workers, both Hispanic, start to make fun of his hair, his skinny jeans, and essentially his entire appearance. I remember him mentioning them specifically calling him a marica, which essentially translates to bundle of sticks, and also them wondering where his balls fit in those tight jeans, and concluding he probably didn't have any, all while subtly laughing and still maintaining a professional demeanor as they fill his bowl. Sean was able to stay composed and quiet and acted completely oblivious to everything they were saying and just carried on down the line ordering. By the time he gets to the cash register, the cashier, who was not one of the two employees, rings him out. That's when he calmly asks the cashier to call over the two employees, which they did since there was no line at the time. When the employees come, wondering what was up, Sean says, in English, "I really appreciate the service both of you provided. Your commentary was also top notch. Now, if you could be so kind." And then, without missing a beat, he says, in perfect zero accent Spanish, "Me pueden llamar a su jefe," which translates to, "Could you call over your boss?" Sadly, I wasn't there, but he says their reaction is a moment he will never forget. The manager gave him 10 gift cards to the restaurant, as well as not having to pay for that meal. And living close to that specific location, he never saw those two employees again. Then we have a contribution from Orca C down in the comments. This reminds me of a story about my granny and granddad. My gran grew up in a tiny village of Scotland. She didn't speak any English until she started attending school. They spoke Gaelic at home. She moved to Canada as a nurse and met my granddad. They were later married in Scotland and honeymooned on Skye. While there, they stayed in a small bed and breakfast. The entire weekend, the woman who runs the place talks about how she thinks they aren't actually married and what a promiscuous woman that makes my gran. My gran doesn't respond all weekend. When they leave, she compliments the woman on her beautiful house, how clean everything was, how delicious the food was, and thanks her for such a memorable weekend. All in fluent Gaelic, of course. Apparently, the woman was absolutely speechless. And then, we have another contribution from Creep Shaming. My cousin used to work where you can get Grand Slams for breakfast, and she looks pretty much exactly like your friend. There was a Hispanic family that would come in all the time and complain about the food so they would get free meals. She took their table one day, and because she was fluent in Spanish but didn't look it, they were talking mad flack about how easy it was to pull the scam on the restaurant right in front of her. My cousin listened in and let her manager know. When she asked how everything was and they started complaining, she started responding in Spanish. The manager brought over their check to make sure they went to the counter to pay. Guys, come on. If you're gonna speak another language expecting no one else to know it, don't pick Spanish, which is like, what, the second or third most spoken language on planet Earth? Our next Reddit post is from BB8. So, my friend, we'll call him John, is a very good reader because his parents wouldn't let him entertain himself in any other way when he was young. This parenting also made him into a bit of a butthole. So John is in English class, and this girl, we'll call her Kim, was annoying him repeatedly over multiple classes. So he decides how to get some revenge. At the start of class, you have to read a book for 10 minutes. John notices what book she was reading and bought it. He then reads the whole book over the weekend just to then spoil the book to her, which is part of a book series. Nothing big, but I found it funny. Then someone asked, he couldn't have just looked up what happened on the internet? And OP replies, I said he read a lot of books. I never said he was smart. Our next Reddit post is from Nerdy Skeleton. So I'm a senior in high school this year, and ever since 7th grade, there's been this one girl who's always asked me for answers, and cheated off me when she could. This year, we had to take a civics exam as part of our graduation requirements. There's only one retake, and if you fail, depending on how many credits you have, you may have to go to summer school and then receive your diploma. Anyway, I was sick on the initial test day, so I had to go to the retake. Guess who was there and sat next to me? Yep. So the test starts, and I can tell she's cheating off me because she's not being subtle about it. No big deal in my opinion, you gotta do what you gotta do, but then she starts smacking her gum. I'm a misophoniac, which is someone who has a strong hatred of certain sounds, and all I can see is red. So at about the 50th question, I start putting all incorrect answers. I finish up and pretend to double check. She doesn't do the same. She gets up to turn it in, and I start to erase. When she sits down, she sees I'm changing my answers, and she quietly begins to panic. I finish and turn it in. A week later, I'm in the college and career prep office turning in a senior packet, and she's bawling her eyes out, with her parents in the counselor's office. Something about summer credit recovery and a civics test grade. Our next Reddit post is from Jenny Vasan. For some ironic airport profiling context, the guy in this story is a young, college-aged white guy in shorts. I'm a brown woman in winter gear, silly with pom-poms. He's sitting in my gate, but we're not on the same flight. Mine boards in like 20 minutes. A few minutes after I sit down, in a seat he'd made almost unreachable with his big, exposed, unwinterized legs, he asks if I'll watch his bag for a second. I know this isn't good practice, but I usually say yes anyway, since 99.99% of the time, people really do need to use the bathroom, and there's no harm in doing a solid while they do a solid. I said sure, but pointed out that my flight boarded soon. He said, yeah, I'll be back in a second. He left, and I went back to scrolling my phone. I didn't time it exactly, but eventually, my flight started boarding, and it was a tiny one, so it boarded fast. Now I'm in a pickle, but I'm also mad because where the F is this guy? At this point, it's been at least 15, 20 minutes or more. More than enough time to do number one or number two. Grab food, do whatever. It's the F gates at O'Hare, so everything is really close together. Even when I do this, I make sure to head back as soon as possible, just out of courtesy. Not to mention that airports expressly don't want people doing this. Yet, if I walk off and leave the bags unattended, they'll get confiscated, and he'll have to do a song and dance to get them back, probably missing his flight. F him for putting me in this position, and honestly, F him for not facing the same consequences I probably would have if I wandered off and abandoned my luggage. I made the call. I told the gate agent I'd been watching the bags and the owner hadn't returned. She said fine, the police would pick them up. I boarded my flight and we're about to take off. He's probably cursing me at the gate right now. If he had diarrhea or an extremely premature heart attack or some real reason to delay, I ask his forgiveness in heaven. But who knows? Maybe I stop the next neckbeard airport bomber. In any case, I let my petty flag fly today. Man, this is bizarre to me. Is this a thing that people do often? I would never leave my bags with a stranger in an airport. That's just stupid. Our next Reddit post is from Odissio. I didn't really take part in this, but it just happened right in front of me, and I thought it was great material for this sub. Context, I work at a big family-owned dealership, which has a high-ish turnover, which means we are constantly hiring new salespeople. When they're hired, they get a box of 500 business cards for free, and after that, they have to pay for them. Tim, not his real name, was hired a little over a month ago, and on his free box, he has 499 cards. The boxes never have 500 exact. They usually have over 500. I'm not exactly sure why this happens, but the boxes are slightly bigger, so they tend to have over the number of cards that it's supposed to have. So, this store, I make the order of the business cards with X company. A week ago, Tim asked me to order him a box and said to me, and make sure you don't screw it up like last time. My box better have 500 So I better get 500. You better count my cards and make sure I have all mine, or else I'm not paying for them. He has to pay for them regardless. The company guy already looked very annoyed with him, and he says, I don't really see the need for this, but sure, let's count them for you. He started counting them in front of Tim, and the count ended up being 516. I'm sorry about this. I'll just burn these 16 extra later. No, leave those. You owe them to me because of last time. You said you wanted your 500, so sorry, can't do it. You're only paying for 500, so that's all you're getting. After that, he threw the extras in the shredder box. Tim looked angry, and I felt happy for what I just witnessed. After that, Tim just left and went to smoke with a very annoyed face, and the company X guy looked like he was going to have a nice rest of the day. The malicious compliance move would have been to pick up just one of those 16 cards and then burn the other 15. Our next Reddit post is from Child. A little bit of background. I've been working at a restaurant for about 18 months as a food. It was an okay job, but the company was going corporate and they had really stopped caring about their employees. We were super short-staffed because of this. I was one of only 2 food runners, and normally they have 6 to 10 people hired. And I was considering quitting too because I was tired of being mistreated. One week in October, I got really sick. I had a low fever, was congested, I passed out earlier, and I had double pink eye. That week, I was scheduled to work Tuesday, Friday, and Saturday. Legally, you can't handle food when you have pink eye, so I called out of work on Tuesday. My manager told me it didn't matter if I had pink eye, and if you don't come in, you'll need a doctor's note, or we may have to let you go. The manager didn't care if I was contagious. She would rather have me work while sick than risk me taking a day off I didn't need. I wasn't surprised I would need a doctor's note, but it really pissed me off that she threatened to fire me for not coming in. That wasn't the company policy. She was just abusing her power. I ended up going to the doctor the next day. At the same time I turned in my doctor's note, I turned in my 2 weeks' notice. This meant the restaurant was down to only 1 food runner. To be honest, I probably would have kept working there if my manager wouldn't have threatened to fire me for calling in sick. A few weeks later, a friend told me they still hadn't been able to hire someone new, which made quitting so much more satisfying. Our next Reddit post is from NedRackB. So, I'm at Costco in need of dog food, and it's ridiculously busy for a Monday. Barely any parking spots until I spot the lot. I make my way down the aisle, and I'm about to turn into the parking spot when a lady runs over the curb and almost hits me to take the spot. Thankfully, I tapped my brakes in time, or she would have taken off my bumper. I look up, and she's shaking her head and wagging her finger in a no motion. WTF? I was like, okay, I'll just wait for her to back up since I'm obviously turning into the spot. She doesn't. My girlfriend is with me and was pissed that the lady wasn't budging. I gave her my Costco card and just sat in the aisle in a face-off with this lady. She goes inside, gets the dog food, comes back out, and loads up the car. She then pushes the cart into the spot we were waiting for and hops in the car. The look on the woman's face was enough to give me satisfaction for a week. She had to get out and move the cart so she could park once I finished the entire aisle. Worth it. How does this lady have the audacity to drive over the frickin' curb and then try to scold her like, I can't believe you tried to take my space. Kids these days have no respect. OP didn't describe the other driver at all, but don't you just know that she's a boomer? Our next Reddit post is from Parkhead Boy. So, my driveway is on the corner of my street and has recently had double yellow lines put on the road to stop people parking there and causing issues for buses, etc. As I was preparing to leave my house yesterday, I noticed through my door that someone was blocking me in. This doesn't happen that often, usually delivery drivers, so I opened my door to have a look. A middle-aged woman is locking her car door and walking away, so I told her that she couldn't park on double yellow lines and block my car. She proceeded to tell me that she had a disabled badge and was popping to the shops to collect a parcel. I explained that even with the disabled badge, she couldn't park there and that I was leaving anyway, so she was blocking. I also explained that there's disabled parking at the shops. Now, this is the point that really started the petty revenge. She told me that she didn't want to park at the shops and wanted to park there, that she always parks there, and that that she can stay there for 3 hours if she likes, using the disabled pass, and that if I take up any more of her time, she'll call the police before striding away from me. I checked the laws, which said she can park on double yellow lines, but only if she's not an obstruction and is 15 meters away from a junction, which she wasn't. So I decided that if she wanted to be that petty, then so be it. I got in my car and reversed it down my driveway until it was 5 centimeters away from the driver door. When she returned 10 minutes later, the shops are a 30-second walk away. She asked me to move my car, to which I explained that I was trying to leave my house, but unfortunately someone was in the way, so I had to leave the car there. To finish this off, she had to call a member of her family to come down, go into the passenger side, squeeze over to the driver's side, and move the car. As they did that, I thanked them for their efforts, jumped in my car, and drove away. That's what you get for being a butthole. It always amazes me how nice people are involving car stories. When that lady came back, I'd be tempted to be like, oh man, you should have seen it. A couple of street hooligans came by and totally keyed up your car. I tried to stop them, but they got away, so sorry, lady. Our next Reddit post is from random username. During the 7th grade, I had a history teacher, Mr. G, that wouldn't really let students go to the bathroom after he put large restrictions on bathroom usage. I was kinda pissed, but there wasn't anything that I could do about it. So one day during class, I just really had to fart. I didn't want to do it in class, so I asked Mr. G if I could do it in the bathroom, but he wouldn't let me. I asked him again, but he just told me to sit down. Little old me was pretty mad that my teacher was putting restrictions on my bladder. I was so mad that I did as he told me to. However, before I did, I asked him one more time, and he still dismissed me. So I went to my desk, and then I farted. It was glorious. It was the most gaseous and loudest fart I had ever let out. And after I farted, people had to cover their noses with their shirts because it was so smelly. Even Mr. G did, and everyone in the room was so disgusted by what just transpired. Afterwards, with a smirk on my face, I turned to Mr. G and asked him again if I could go to the bathroom. He then blushed and said I could. And after that day, during next period, he then lifted the restrictions he put upon us. Then, Rudbeck of Rudbeck asked down in the comments, please tell me you stared into his eyes and looked deep into his soul while letting it rip. And OP replies, maybe a little. That was r/Petty Revenge, and if you like this content, then please let me know by hitting that like button because it really helps my channel grow.
I was told there was nothing more they could do, apart from managing pain going forward. 6 super sad confessions of Reddit. Try not to cry at the last story. At 55, I've come to the sobering realization I have wasted my life. It's 5:25 a.m. on a Saturday morning. I did not work today, as I haven't for over a year. I did not leave my house but stayed in on Reddit, drew some poor pictures and masturbated. I fell asleep with the computer on my chest and as I put it to the floor, it all rushed to me, the children I would never have, the wife I'd never know, the home that would never ring with laughter, or sit with a hush on a snowy Sunday morning as everyone slept. I have hit no personal highs. I've worked since I was 14 and made a half-career with a few accolades but nothing worthy of life. I am alone. Deeply alone and at 5:31 a.m. in the morning there is no one to tell this to. If I had more steel in me, I'd kill myself right now. But I am afraid of everything. I'm afraid of success, of failure, of traveling and of the future. I have faded away and become a hermit with a tepid, pale hope of simply fading away. I cry myself to sleep every night because my baby was born with Downs. There are so many emotions. This is our first baby and my husband said it will be our last because our son was born with Downs. It was something we never tested for because we weren't considered high risk and it doesn't run in the family. I feel guilty for so many reasons. Like I let my husband down, I did something to cause this and that I probably would have had an abortion if I knew. But I love this baby so much and he's mine for better or worse. I feel angry because I'm being robbed of a normal parenthood. I drink so much that I black out and sometimes have these dreams where my baby is born with no defects or wake up hoping to God it was all a nightmare. Have had intercourse with my wife only twice in the last 10 years. I have a mental block of sorts, about having sex, I think. My wife and I have been together for almost 10 years now, married not so long ago. In all those years, we have been very active sexually. But all we did was oral sex and hand jobs. At least for the last 1 year, we have been intimate at least twice a week. At times even thrice a day. But during all those times, it ended with just oral and hand jobs, again. One of the major reasons we don't end up having sex is we are super lazy for it. She doesn't want to try any position other than below and missionary. And in my case, if I have to go on for more than 5 minutes, I end up quitting the effort. Additionally, there are only 2 or 3 specific ways I need the pressure on my penis for the act to result into orgasming. And somehow, I never felt that orgasming pressure whenever we tried having an intercourse. The only 2 times we had successful intercourse, she had been on top both times. But as I mentioned before, both of us are lazy. So it's hard to convince my wife. I have contemplated seeking a doctor's help, but have been postponing it yet. Well, it took me 10 years to even speak about it on Reddit, or rather anyone other than my wife. Not sure how can we sort out this issue. Both of us were virgins before being with each other. Neither of us have any intercourse experience with anyone else either. I love my wife, but I don't know how to love my kids in life. 2 years ago I finally married a girl I loved for a long time. I still love her more than anything in my life. We have the same hobbies, we do almost everything together. Before that we lived in a very small apartment. She had some emotional problems from her past, suffered from depression and cut herself. After we got together, it was better, but there were still days when I came back home to see a crying girlfriend with bandaged hands and blood all over the bathroom floor. 90% of days were great, but I lived in constant fear of what can happen in those 10% when she hurts herself. We never talked about having kids, but I knew she wanted them. When her friend got pregnant she became very miserable. The doctor told her that due to her health issues and stress it might be very difficult for her to get pregnant. We had unprotected sex for a long time before that, but as I knew she wanted kids and I wasn't really against it, although I wasn't 100% sure I want kids, we just continued as usual. We had sex at least once a day. At that time I thought I am simply a lucky guy, but after all this time I think she used sex as an escape from her mind. 2 months after I proposed, she finally got pregnant. After that, it was fantastic. Since then she never cut herself again. It actually made her a much more stable and happier person. Our relationship improved, we both smiled more, sex was still fantastic, she was happy, I was happy and didn't have to fear what will I see when I get back home. After a few months of her being pregnant we got married and bought a house. Like a dream, right? But shortly after that I found out something is wrong. I wasn't happy that she is pregnant. I faked every positive emotion about pregnancy. I wanted her to get an abortion. I secretly wished she will miscarriage. When I touched her belly I faked that I am happy to feel the baby kicking. I never told her this. I don't know why, I thought I want a child. In reality I just wanted my wife to be happy. I only cared about her happiness, but slowly destroyed mine. I didn't want a house. I never wanted a life where I got from work to start another work on a house. But I knew it will make her happy, so I went with it and faked all enthusiasm. When our little boy was born, I felt nothing for him. I was not hating him, but I didn't love him. I don't know why, I simply saw him as a parasite. I should love him, but I just didn't. I tried to give him as much attention as he needed, tried spending all my time after work with him. Nothing. He only brought me sleepless nights, stress, resentment, anxiety. I hated going home from work. When I went to calm him for the 5th time in one night I just wished he would die. I couldn't handle it. Each day was a new nightmare, weekends were hell. I couldn't say anything to my wife, it would break her heart. But of course she noticed. I was more and more nervous each day. Sometimes at nights I got so angry I said things I regret so much. I said to my wife that our boy is a little F and hate having kids, I hate being a father, I hate our life. Eventually we somehow got over it. The relationship with my wife took hit after having kid, but in the end everything worked out. We managed to get through it with minimum fighting and never hurt each other physically or by cursing. After about 6 months, I started to like my son. Not to love him. I was just less irritated by him. But it was definitely better. After some time we started talking about having a second kid. At first I was terrified. But I knew my wife would be happy, and with me slowly starting to love my son I agreed. I made a mistake. This time it was supposed to be a girl. I was glad that I will have both son and daughter. But again, I faked being happy during her pregnancy. It was exactly the same all over again as with my son. Our little girl was born 45 days ago and we keep her in our bedroom for the time being. Every day since then is more miserable than the previous one. My daughter always cries when I hold her. This morning, I lost it again. Daughter cried and cried, I could not manage to soothe her, I couldn't bear it anymore. All the stress, all the anxiety, everything that was building up inside me got out. I wanted to throw my daughter against the floor and leave and never return. I put her back to her crib and tried to stay calm but I couldn't. Of course by this time my wife was already woke. I said my daughter is a FNC, that I am a terrible father and I always knew I would be, that I destroyed my life by my own fault. Then I started to dress to get for work 2 hours earlier. I just escaped to my work without saying goodbye, it's our thing. I always kiss my wife before leaving. After I got to work I wrote to my wife that she is the only good thing in my life. Yes, only her, not our kids, not our house, nothing else. We wrote for a while, without fighting or anything. She tries to be understanding and said it may be good for me to visit a shrink. She is probably right. My wife is a wonderful, intelligent, funny woman, perfect mother, perfect cook, still hot after 2 kids and exercising to be even hotter. After spending all time with kids daily and being dead tired, she still tries to keep our sex life alive. I couldn't hope for a better woman. We never had a big fight, never hurt each other physically, I never even thought about hurting her. We always try to keep it calm when we have an argument. But I know I can't tell her what went through my head during the pregnancies and how I hate almost anything in my life except her. She tells me often how happy she is with her life. And I know I can't be happy without her. I lie to her that I am happy too. I know I don't deserve her. She deserves someone that would lovingly accept the life I have. Someone that would care for our kids and really love them, to happily take care of the house so the family has everything they need and deserve. So I am staring like an idiot at blank wall and don't know what to do. I love my wife. I know she loves me. Will the other things get better? I try to love my kids, but so far it doesn't work out. I try to care for the house, but so far I only see it as a waste of time and money. Every day now I live in constant fear that my wife would get fed up of me and leave. Should I still try even though I still fail? Isn't that just bringing suffering to all of us? Should I leave so she will have a chance to meet someone better that might make her truly happier? I don't want to leave, I want to be with all of them. To learn how to love my kids and my life. But what if I am just keeping them all from a chance for a better life? I want to make this work but I don't know how. It's like something snapped inside of me and I can't see the good things in life anymore. All I see is our mortgage, kids crying and a woman that deserves much more than she has. As I wrote this I still can't believe how amazing my wife is and how lucky I am to have what I have. Maybe I sound like an ungrateful ass. And I probably am. I want to learn how not be like that. If managed to read all of this, thank you for hearing me out. It helped to tell someone what I feel. I used to work at a suicide hotline. I didn't talk about my job at family reunions, and for some reason, I was always so secretive about it. I felt like every person, every single one, ringing through the call center was a close friend of mine. I understood where they were coming from and I was very emotional over everything when I was talking to a caller. I was told before my interview exactly how serious this job was. There would be children, really young kids on the verge of giving up. There would be kids who feel like death is the only way out because they're poor, or not accepted in their family, or gay, or trans, or being bullied relentlessly. There would be older men who were veterans and couldn't get over flashbacks, some without any family or money or home. There would be younger men and women, around my age and occasionally under 20, who had been in wars and couldn't take the weight of the things they'd done. They usually had adoring families, children that barely knew their parents, or siblings who wanted to be just like them. Some of them gave me numbers to pass messages to. That broke me. Call this number, tell my wife and kids that I love them more than anything. That call I remembered in specific. It hit me more than anything ever had. I was trying to keep my composure on my side of the phone. I ended up saving him, but that one stuck with me. The day after, I lost my first caller. It was so early in my career, but I did everything I could within my power and knowledge. There was a girl that called, she just sounded tired. Unbelievably tired, as if her soul had nothing left in it, she was just drained. I remember that her name was Amber. She told me that she had made a decision and that I had no reason to try and help her. She was going to die and she just needed someone to be there for her. As Amber went on, I stalled as long as I could. Family? None. Therapy? Never helped. I went through the motions and heard Amber from the other side of the phone tell me to stop. She had given up and I guess I caved in. I told her that I would really miss her and I was there if she would please change her mind. No such luck. I remember my exact words after. "I'm here, Amber, I'm here. I care about you and I'm sorry it's gotten to this point. I'll think about you every day and I'll remember you, I promise. I love you and I'll miss you." There was no reply from the other side of the phone, just a few seconds of silence, and then a bang so loud that I dropped the phone onto the desk. I took the rest of the week off. I stayed homesick and cried more than I care to admit. I wrote Amber, March 5, 2013 on a little sticky note and put it on my wall. I wasn't ready for this job and I knew it, but I sucked it up because I wanted to be the hero I thought I was. After 3 years of working at the hotline, I quit. I was starting to go back into that toxic mindset. I had lost so many people, every one of them that I knew about had a name and date on my wall. I kept thinking about it. If I wasn't the hero, if I couldn't save everyone, what was I? What was I even there for? Why did I exist on an earth where I let down so many people? I was having graphic thoughts of my own death, then. Really violent dreams. That's when I quit. The only reason that I'm here is to write about my experiences as a hotline worker, maybe some other stories on the side. That's all. Recently found out my cancer has returned and it's terminal. I'm more concerned about my family than anything. 3 years ago I was diagnosed with Ewing's sarcoma, PNET, a rare type of cancer found predominantly in children and young adults. Long story short, I began chemotherapy immediately and roughly 7 months later I was told the tumor had shrunk enough to be operated on. The surgery was a success and I was officially in remission. 2.5 years went by. My hair has grown back nicely, I've returned to a healthy weight and I'm living life to the fullest. I'm studying to be a nurse, got a job working at a local clothing store and recently moved into my boyfriend's apartment. About a month ago I went to the doctor for a regular checkup. I'd been feeling fatigued and dealing with pain, so as a precaution the doctor did some blood work and scans. He told me if they find any abnormalities to expect a call back. Well, lo and behold, I received a call a few days later and returned to the doctor's office. He showed me the scans, and it was lit up like a Christmas tree. Anyway, there's no easy way to put it. My cancer has not only returned, it has come back with a vengeance and spread to my lymph nodes. It is everywhere. I was told there was nothing more they could do, apart from managing pain going forward. It's terminal. I was told I have less than a year to live. It's been exactly a week since I received the news. I haven't told anyone yet. My whole family are extremely close and my first battle with cancer completely devastated them. Especially my mom. She developed severe depression and anxiety during the first round, and she is really only just starting to move forward now. I almost can't bear the thought of putting them through it again. I wish I could just keep it a secret forever. Obviously I have to tell them eventually, I guess I just need advice. What's the best way to tell them? When do I tell them? How do I even begin to explain it's terminal? Meanwhile on my end, as morbid as it may sound, I've actually come to accept it. Yes, the idea of death is a terrifying concept but hey, I've lived a great life. I've met so many amazing people and accomplished so much during my short time here. I beat cancer once, fell in love, moved out of home, plus I have an amazing group of family and friends. My only regret is the fact that I will never get to see my grandma ever again. The costs of cancer-related treatments within the last few years has left our family in so much debt, that I can't afford to travel cross-country to see her one last time. If I could have had one wish, that would have been it. However, this is only a small issue in light of the circumstances, so I try not to dwell on it. Thanks for listening to Radio TTS. Hit the subscribe button and activate the notification bell for more sad videos. Click the right box for the Confessions playlist. Let us know in the comments what you think about these stories. We found out I had become pregnant. From Colonel Gaddafi. 5 strange and questionable confessions of Reddit. I cheated on my wife so I could have children and it was a terrible mistake. This is probably way too specific but I don't care anymore. I married a girl who didn't want to have children. I always did. We fought about it at first but then she let on that she'd be okay with it. Eventually. Well, that didn't happen. We got married and there were terrific times and awful times. but overall it was a decline over the years until we both realized that it wasn't going to work anymore. I'm making it sound as if we parted on an equal understanding of our incompatibility. Nah. That's not what happened. In fact, I pined away for a much younger woman for years while I worked on her as a sort of side opportunity. As in, I groomed her, she was of age, while I continued my marriage because I'm like a monkey who needs another branch to grab onto before he lets go of the last one. Sick. So anyhow, I cheated on my wife, then I told her I did, and it broke her heart. I moved on, divorced, remarried, impregnated this new person, who I was not nearly as compatible with, and here I am, the proud father of a beautiful, wonderful child. I love my child more than anything on the earth, but I do not get along with the mother, and I fear that it's going to end in tragic divorce. I would never leave her, but she may just leave me out of incompatibility. She says she never would, but I don't believe it. I don't believe anything because I'm the king of lies and I don't trust anyone, ever. So long story short, I basically wanted to die all the time. I hate my job, I hate my life, my relationship horrifies me, and I know I'm going to end up alone with the only thing I love, my perfect child, taken away from me and endless suffering. My ex was right. I cannot handle this. I think I am a wonderful father, but I should have taken more time to do this. I should have searched for someone I was compatible with instead of just marrying and knocking up the next convenient fling. I'm going to pay for this and I don't want to. I'm tired of being nervous. I'm tired of thinking. I'm horrified of death, but sometimes it seems like the end of worry would be such a release. Then my dumb butt would be out of the way at least, and the world could go on living, and my wife could find a new man in time for my kid to not remember me. I'm not immediately suicidal, so don't engage in internet heroics on my behalf, please, but I am severely depressed. I am ready to do anything just for attention. First of all, some background. I am a 17-year-old female who didn't have the happiest childhood. My mother was always asleep, and never really cared about me. I got abused, both physically and mentally, and bullied a lot. I actually live with my aunt, who always took well care of me, and gave me attention. I don't know when it exactly started, but I used to do a lot of bad things, simply to satisfy my need of attention. I started by telling everyone I was a cannibal, then cry when they would call me that. I harmed myself and I even faked depression to some of my friends. I also tried to convince myself I was psychopath, and auto-diagnosed myself with a lot of medical conditions. More than that, the only condition I really have is narcissism, and all of that helped me to keep people centered around me. I even planned to kill someone once, then wanted to turn myself in, since I knew I would have a lot of attention. I didn't do it though, not because I wouldn't be able to, but because I'm scared of my aunt. I also told people I was trans and told others I was schizophrenic. I wish I could get rid of this need, but I am not able to. I fake things pretty well, so people always believe me. My friend is overweight and I don't agree with her #body positivity. I have a very close friend who I love to bits. She has a massively bubbly personality, she's kind and is an overall a very good person. She is overweight, to the point of morbidly obese. I've known her for 7 years and during the time I've known her, she's always been a big girl. It has never bothered me, and I've always looked past her weight. It wasn't until last autumn when she posted a picture of herself with the caption "Love who you are no matter what" and #body positivity that I started to have thoughts about confronting her about it. Like I said, I don't have an issue with how my friend chooses to live her life. I just find it difficult to read her posts, knowing that she's been struggling with weight loss and is now suddenly is just accepting her body. I see overweight as any other substance abuse and don't agree that you should beautify or glorify it. Personally, I don't judge people for how they want to live. However, I don't give in to the mindset that being overweight is a goal that should be strived for or be content with. Don't get me wrong, a person who has curves, and a person who is overweight to me are widely different. I love my friend and believe that this movement is just an excuse for her to finally accept herself, which to me is sad. I want her to accept herself, but still continue losing excess weight so she may live a long and prosperous life. I have never confronted her about her weight earlier. It's a given fact which she doesn't need to hear constantly about. I am just afraid that people in her life are sugarcoating her feeds with positivity instead of giving her proper feedback. I don't know, I feel as I am in the wrong no matter what I choose to do. I despise ghetto blacks and feel threatened in their presence. So today, my lady friend and I took a stroll in a city park. It's always really quiet in the park where all the museums are at. Being one of the first decent days in many months, we thought it would be great to get out and visit the art museum. Haven't gone there in a long time. It just so happened there was some kind of event for a radio station right outside of the museum. Today is Pi Day, and my area code is 314, so the station was having some kind of party thing. It was nothing but Lil Wayne, hundreds of rowdy ghetto trash blacks, and lots of littering. It's worth adding that the park is usually very quiet, and I hate to say it, full of responsible regular people, of all races. My girlfriend and I figured we could just navigate around the crowd and go inside. Well, not even the first horde of blacks we see stare us down and start talking about us at full volume. Normally, I would say something, but it's 5 black dudes versus 1 clean-cut white guy. My girlfriend looks down the hallway and then some dude comes by us and tells us to leave and that we aren't welcome there, in much more unpleasant terms. Eyes. Dozens of pairs of eyes giving us nasty stares. Meanwhile the police are showing up by the car full, might I add, to quell the situation. It was the first time in my life I experienced a blood-boiling hatred for an entire group of people. I have a good number of very nice black friends, but the ghetto ones anger me to no end. Another first for me was the want to have a firearm on me. I know I shouldn't feel like this, but I hate it when someone hates me even though they don't even know me. I am not a conservative, but I can definitely see where many get their views from. We coddle ghetto blacks and scream bloody murder when one gets shot by a non-black. Yet ghetto blacks kill and beat both blacks and non-blacks all the time, yet those stories never make the news. Anyway, we decided to just go to a different part of the park, but the anger has yet to leave me. I had an affair with Colonel Gaddafi in the late 80s. In 1988 I had an affair with Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, and in light of reading excerpts from Gaddafi's harem I decided to share my story. Some have suggested I have Stockholm Syndrome, I cannot say. Also I was a bit cautious with what I posted on Reddit, but I suppose I'll tell the full story now, might as well. I was raised by a single father, he worked as an FSO and we moved around quite often. My mother was an Italian national whom he divorced not long after I was born. My father had a son from a previous marriage and he wanted my brother and I to have contact, although we had little since he lived with his mother in NYC. My dad and I weren't particularly close, despite spending most every waking minute with each other. He had developed an addiction to benzodiazepines and, while he was able to function, remembered little of what happened during his binges. In '88 I was 15, I was worldly, having been to most of Europe and a few far-flung countries, but I was also extremely naive considering most of my social interaction was with my father. My dad was to attend a summit in a European city, I cannot say what or where without perhaps compromising myself, and naturally I tagged along. I didn't attend the meeting, but I accompanied my father to the reception. A fairly nice affair. To a teenager it was reminiscent of an awards show. I mostly was interested in coming because Colonel Gaddafi was going to attend with his delegation. I believe he had an interview with some foreign TV station. It wasn't long after the Tripoli air raids and he was supposedly a very dangerous man, though I found him handsome. The Libyan table was perhaps 4 tables down, and I remember leaning back in my chair to see him. At some point he looked in my direction and our eyes met. I immediately looked away and backed down at my food. After a few seconds I looked back up and saw him still staring. I felt embarrassed. After dinner my father retired for another night of drug-fueled oblivion at our hotel. Our hotel wasn't particularly fancy, but I got my own room since I was a big girl now. At some point I remember hearing a knock at my father's door and him answering, undoubtedly hi. The hotel was one where there was a locked door between rooms, so I tried to listen in. It's a shame I didn't know the glass to the door trick. The person left my father and there was a knock on my door. I looked out and there was this burly looking woman in a dress suit. When I answered she told me to come with her, that it was important and my father knew. She took me in a nice car to a fancy hotel in the city center. She yanked me around and was generally rude. She told me that Gaddafi had seen me at the reception and wanted to ask me a few questions. Naturally I was terrified, thinking I was in trouble and about to be murdered. I met Muammar in his room. I was afraid at first, but after a fairly long conversation and a few drinks, milk, coffee, I began to feel fairly relaxed. His English was good, surprisingly, and he was rather soft-spoken. He was curious to know why I was staring, and wanted to meet me personally. Now, for a socially deprived teenager this attention, especially from a grown-up, was exhilarating. I remember laughing, but not really knowing how to answer. Now, I won't get detailed on what happened next. I was above the age of consent in that particular country and willing. With me there's a bit of cognitive dissonance with how he's been portrayed and how he was with me, night and day. I don't know if he changed after me, or if the other stories are lies. I'd like to think that they were. He held me during most of the night, talking about a number of things. Sometimes going off in Arabic. I just sat and listened. I recall him saying that he and his wife were not doing well, and he had been very lonely. She blamed him for the air raids. He told me I was a great comfort and I would have made a good wife. I remember Judd flat out saying that I wanted to stay with him, let him take me away from my father and the constant moving. He was quiet for a long while before saying that our paths were meant to cross only briefly, but I would be his in paradise. He was very kind and loving, certainly the best I've ever been treated in my life. At the end of the week I was returned to my hotel and my father was up around lunch. I didn't mention my week and he didn't ask. We stayed in that country for another 2 weeks before briefly returning to Malta. It was around the time that we were to move that I began to fall ill, vomiting like clockwork every morning. My father took me to a clinic to be treated for the flu, and we found out I had become pregnant. He was furious, saying I'd ruined my life, you know, all that stuff a dad would say to his daughter upon such news. He asked who the father was and I made up a lie about someone I had met at a bar while he was asleep in his room. He was terribly embarrassed, and took time off to take me home. Thankfully, for my sake, Malta had good relations with Libya and I was able to send a letter to Muammar, telling him of what had happened. He had an address you could send fan mail, different times though the consulate there. Nearly 3 months later we had moved back to the US. My father was considering sending me to my mother, but was on the fence. I was taking classes at a local prep school. We were devout Catholics. One afternoon he asked me if I had made a friend. He held up a letter covered in stamps and beat to hell and back. I shook my head no and took it. When I opened it, a slip of paper slid out with a letter. The paper was a visa of sort, green border with a holographic stamp. The letter was handwritten, from Muammar. I didn't get to read it closely because my dad put 2 and 2 together and snatched it from me. I recall it saying not to be afraid, that he had thought of me over the last few months and regretted not saying yes to me. That I was welcome to come, if I so wanted, and be a second wife, albeit secretly, that I would be loved and cared for. I remember seeing the color drain from my father's face as he read it. He shook it in my face saying, "Who wrote this, Anna?" He grabbed me by my hair and shook me. I confessed everything. I don't remember much after that. He punched the wall. I could hear him yelling, but I don't remember what. He dragged me to my room and locked me in. I stayed there for the next 2 days. When he came around he said that he had to take me to a gynecologist appointment. I got dressed and went with him. I felt like something was wrong when we didn't go to my normal doctor, but a clinic I had never been to. The nurse took me back to a room and put an IV in my arm. I remember the doctor, or at least who I thought was the doctor, come in and say something to the effect of, "Relax, you won't feel a thing, this will all be over soon." I remember jumping up in this blind panic, yanking out the IV, slinging blood everywhere. The nurse tried to hold me down, but I nearly bit off her finger. I turned to go towards the door, but whatever drug they put into the IV began to kick in. I felt lightheaded and must have knocked something over, because I remember hearing a clanging noise. That's the last I remember. My dad took me home. We did not speak. I went to my room and stayed there for 3 days, only leaving to go to the bathroom to try to clean myself. I bled for days. On the 3rd day he came up begging me to eat something. I told him to go away. He began to cry and told me how sorry he was, and that I was to have a son. I ate dinner that night and we never mentioned it again. In my life I attempted to have relationships with 3 other men. I slept with 2. They were terrible experiences and I swore off men. I had fallen in love with Muammar, and have never overcome it. I seriously considered suicide a couple of times, and even attempted to run away when I was 18. I never got another letter. My father became severely ill and died in the months leading up to the Libyan revolution. I was his main caretaker, being as my brother lived far away. He knew he was dying and made a confession to me, that there had been other letters. The letters came at roughly 6-month intervals until the visa had expired. He read them and burned them while I was away at college. He said that the only one that stood out was the last, coming a few months before the visa expired. It had read something to the effect of, "I understand your decision to no longer remain in contact, but at least grant me the privilege of sending a photograph of you and my child." That day I made the decision to travel to Libya, when the revolution had died down. I was so sure it would, but it didn't. Funny how life works, isn't it? I exist now, don't really live, just exist. Between the nightmares and crippling depression I exist. I keep going, if only for the memory of him. This has been my confession. After 30 years it's good to be honest about my life. So many who know me have never truly known me. I don't want attention, I don't want to write the next great tell-all, I don't want any TV interviews, just to tell my story, here and now. Thanks for listening to Radio TTS. Hit the subscribe button and activate the notification bell for more videos. Click the right box for the Confessions playlist. Let us know in the comments what you think about these stories. And find the original posts linked in the video description for more information. Have you ever encountered true evil? How? I've told this story before, about meeting a murderer. Was a journalist on weekend duty. Got called out to a story, guy claims his car was hijacked with his 2-year-old son in it. I met him at the police station, he seemed devastated. I was devastated, I mean, I'd done plenty of grisly crime stories, but a missing kid is next level awful. Next day I had my day off, the regular crime reporter called me. They'd arrested the dad and found the little boy's body at a rubbish dump. He did it out of revenge for his wife cheating. It still bothers me to this day how I could have felt so much sympathy for this man. I shook his hand, I cried with him. I'm usually very good at picking up when someone is off. Just goes to show you, true evil disguises itself very well. Back in 2011 my uncle down in Mexico had got kidnapped by one of the cartels. They gave my entire family on my dad's side a random, $10,000 and we would get him back. My dad called in people who owed him money and managed to get the 10 grams. He sent it down to the family down south and they paid the ransom for my uncle. All we got in return was my uncle's lifeless body. A few years ago a friend of mine was going through a nasty divorce. Like really bad. He came to visit me one evening as I was getting off of work. When I sat down with him he just seemed off, like a completely different person than the man I had known before. Blank stare in his eyes, no smiling, anger behind everything he said. I chalked it up to the divorce and just thought to myself that he would get better when everything calmed down. I told my wife when I got home about seeing him and she agreed with my assessment. I bumped into his ex-wife and some friends a few days later at another work event. She was actually out celebrating their divorce being finalized, I think, and she invited my wife and I over to a house party. That would be the last time I saw her. My wife and I ended up not going to the house party but the ex-husband did show up. He killed 9 people, including his ex-wife. In Iraq there was a family that we would go see every other week or so while on patrol. We would ask them how things are going and if there was anything they needed us to do. They were a respected family in the area and did a lot to build their community to defend against the violence committed by the insurgency. It was a big family, lots of kids, 3 wives. They were good people just trying to better their community. Their house just happened to be one Arad that was kind of a border between Al-Qaeda controlled territory and coalition controlled territory. One day we were patrolling the road as we did several times per week. And we came across a hole that had been blown into the road making it impassable by vehicle. We turned around and got back onto the road a few miles further down and encountered another hole just like the first. The holes were about 2 miles apart and effective created a corridor for Al-Qaeda fighters to cross the road more freely. We dismounted to get to the family's house. Everyone was on edge. Once we arrived at the house it was immediately noticeable that something was wrong. It was silent and there was a smell surrounding the house. Inside was the most terrible thing I have ever seen. The entire family was gathered into the central room of the house where they were all tortured, raped and murdered. There was maybe a half-inch of blood that was congealing on the floor. If you looked at the scene you could tell the order that it all happened. The father was killed last, the daughters were unclothed and laying face down, the mother and baby were killed with 1 bullet at the same time. By the time we had arrived they had all been dead for 2 or 3 days already. I think about this every day and I've had to stop to cry 3 times just to write it out. My stepmother's 6-year-old nephew is showing all the signs of being a sociopath and a sadist. He has severely physically harmed several students in his school including trying to drown a classmate in the toilet several times, He once tried to strangle a little girl. He locked his older sister in a metal garden shed with a padlock for 4 hours in 100-degree weather and lied about it when asked. The police were called because his mom thought it was a kidnapping. They heard the girl screaming and released her. Their dog had puppies and they kept one. He slammed the dog's head in a car door, killing it. He routinely holds a lit lighter to his body, including his genitalia. He enjoys hurting others. These people live in the mountains, and to get from their house to town they have to come down the mountain, so a road that is on the edge of the mountain. The little boy unbuckled himself, as his mom was driving around a bend where there was a 200-foot drop on the other side, and put his hands over her eyes. More recently he found a belt with a metal buckle and started beating a neighborhood kid with it. One morning his mother came into the kitchen to get breakfast ready and found him hiding behind the doorway with a large knife. She dodged just in time as he swung at her. Even more recently his aunt gave birth to a new baby. My step-aunt woke to go get the baby for a feeding and couldn't find him. They looked everywhere. The 6-year-old was watching with a smile. They eventually found the baby in the dryer, asleep but sweaty. The boy regularly physically attacks his mother and sister, leaving them bloody and bruised. A few months ago I went up for stepmom's birthday and the little boy was present. We were all staying the night at the house. He spent the whole day being sweet and loving towards me, until nighttime, when suddenly he stared at me with these horrible emotionless eyes and told me he didn't like me anymore and wanted me to leave. He then went around the hall and stared at me for a while. I didn't sleep that night. My kids went to visit their mom in the UK on a court-ordered visit. I knew what was going to happen but couldn't prevent the visit. Sure enough, rather than put them on a plane back to me in the USA, she went on the run with them and her boyfriend. I got a lot of help from the Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the US State Department, and the Scottish government paid all my legal fees over there. During the 5 months she had the kids, she tried to brainwash them. She told them if they came back to me, I would allow them to be molested, and kill them. This was relentless. My son was incredibly strong and refused to believe her or cooperate. They were 13 at the time, but my daughter was much easier to manipulate. I really don't know for certain that they weren't physically abused, but a lot of the stuff she accused me of was things she and her then boyfriend, now husband, did to the children. I had to fly to Scotland to appear in a trial. I walked out of the courthouse at 9 p.m. on a Friday night with the children. Normal process for these cases is to have a designated handover 2 or 3 days later, but the child psychologist who interviewed us all was positive that my ex-wife would kill the children, and the judge agreed. I got them back in the clothes they stood in. I have no doubt she would indeed have killed them rather than hand them over to me. 5 years later, she has no contact with the children, their choice. They have anxiety and depression, but are doing remarkably well. They are high school seniors now, and they make me proud every day. When I was a boy, I had a wicked stepmother who reveled in beating me. She would beat me when my father was not present, threatened to kill my brother if I said anything. She would use whatever objects were convenient to beat me with. Wooden spoon, hairbrush, dowel rod, rolling pin, her hands, fists, belt, whatever. One time she used a serpentine belt. She'd hit me where it wouldn't be visible when my father wasn't around. At one point, she had me drop my pants and underwear, and beat me until I nearly passed out. I jerked/tensed out of pain and kicked off of her lap, and kicked her in the face. She proceeded to pick me up by my leg and beat my balls with a wooden spoon. I'm not sure if she counted as evil, but she certainly counted as sadistic and vindictive. My birth mom was abusive. She beat my brother mercilessly and let her boyfriend molest him. She ignored all of us daughters. Went days without eating. There was a kid in my 6th grade class who loved designing his own custom shanks and then stabbing people in the arm or back with them. He had a look of pure joy on his face when he saw that he drew blood and caused suffering to another human. He was only suspended for a week the first 2 times he did this before they finally kicked him out of school after the 3rd time. I used to work with a woman years ago who was estranged from her husband. The day before her husband was going to take their daughter to Disney World, she smothered her daughter with a pillow and then tried, unsuccessfully, to kill herself. I worked with a guy in Ontario who was always posting on Facebook that he just adopted new puppy like every 4 or 5 months. He adopted them from all different shelters and people. Had to have about 8 or 9 at one point. We went to his house for some reason and there were no dogs. No signs of dogs, no toys, no food bowls, etc. We asked about the puppies and he just offhandedly pointed to the backyard, which we noticed was full of little mounds, and said they all were sick and died. Guess he just didn't have good luck with animals. The way he said it was cold. The CSPCA investigated him and tested the remains. He was putting small amounts of his own homemade poison in the dog food and conducting his own little LD50 test. I haven't, but I think my girlfriend has. She works at a preschool/daycare. Ages of children vary from infant to 5. She teaches the 3-year-olds in her part of the building. She told me that there is this one 3-year-old girl that is just a heathen. She literally only wants to hurt people. One day she got in trouble for hitting kids on the head with pots and pans. They use these in the sand pit for fun. She brought the little girl inside to talk to her, and the entire time she is just not listening. Mid-sentence the little girl looks at my GF dead in the eyes and says, "Can you let me go outside so I can hit more people?" The next day she was expelled because she just kept hitting kids in the head with pots and pans. Laughing about it. How do you get expelled from a preschool? I worked the same job and I knew this girl from roughly age 3 to 7, and she is the only person I can confidently say is a sociopath and is a genuinely scary person. She'd coerce people into picking fights with each other, lie, steal, and break things so others couldn't use them. She also had her parents believing she was innocent and perfect, and seeing the way she acted around them I could see why. The worst was when I caught her watch 2 boys, she got to fight each other, with the most satisfied look I'd ever seen. I pulled her aside and asked her why she'd set them at each other, and she played dumb and innocent. I eventually told her I wasn't buying her sweet act essentially, and I'd never seen anyone's face go that emotionless so quickly before. She basically said, "What are you going to do about it?" And like literally what could I do? Timeout did nothing, taking her things away did nothing, telling her parents did nothing. It's been about 6 years since I saw her, so she's in middle school now, and I sometimes wonder if she's still the same. I felt like my aunt was pretty evil, and she was a kindergarten teacher no less. She pulled my arm out of its socket one time when I was 4 and she was helping me cross the road. I visited her when I was 16, and every opportunity she got she would whisper in my ear, "You are worthless. You are nothing. And just keep walking." The visit ended with her trying to strangle me after I took issue with her trying to force feed my brother Ginger, and that was the last time my family spoke to her. I remember fantasizing about getting back at her in some way for a while, but then moved on with my life and grew up. Years later, she was being her typical self with my uncle, her brother, and berating him, calling him worthless, and he shot her in the head, killing her. It was a real tragedy for the family as he shot himself afterwards as well, but I certainly have not missed my aunt. The first boyfriend I ever had, we were both 16. He was a pathological liar and a sociopath. He slowly became possessive and controlling, wanted to be together constantly, would accuse me of wearing things that were too revealing, isolated me from my friends. When I tried to break up with him, he threatened to rape me and kill my dog. He pushed me out of a slowly moving car while his grandmother was driving. I was dumb as a box of rocks and had no self-esteem, so I didn't know any better. I nearly changed schools. My parents put me in therapy among other things. He ruined the first 2 years of high school for me. Over 20 years later he sent me a message on Facebook asking me how I was, like we were old effing pals. I didn't respond. Maybe he changed as an adult, but I seriously doubt it. I found out he died a couple years ago. He was involved in a crime involving his young daughter, and I'm pretty sure he was facing prison time. My husband has. I've wrote about it before, so I copied and pasted. My husband's little sister was 9 and he was 12. He also had 2 girl cousins close in age as well. His uncle raped and killed his sister after killing his aunt. That night when my husband went to the bathroom, he didn't shut the door all the way and the uncle was watching him through the crack. Turns out his sister was folded and put into the bathroom cabinet, and had my husband walked to the back of the bathroom, the uncle would have killed him as well. The uncle went on the run that night, and the next day, my husband and his cousins were playing hide and seek, and my husband ended up pulling his aunt with her head 3/4 of the way off, up from behind a futon. She was wrapped in a carpet. My husband is doing pretty well now. He obviously has PTSD, but he is a great dad, A little overprotective, but that's understandable, and a great husband to me. He is a hard worker and super loving. He has had a miserable life up until we got together 16 years ago. But he really is amazing. He loves with all of his heart. I really am a lucky woman to have a guy like him with the heart he has. Please tell me the uncle is in jail or dead. He is on death row in San Quentin. But he will die of natural causes long before he gets executed. I've spent a lot of time volunteering in a prison, as a teacher. Every one of my students are good people who made bad decisions and are paying their debt. I've never thought of them as evil. Except for one student. Very, very intelligent man. Serving time for killing his wife in a particularly heinous way. In casual conversation, he refers to her as his ex. Like, my ex and I went to Greece once. I was shocked the first time I heard him do it. She's not your ex-wife, man. She didn't divorce you. You chopped her to pieces. Closest thing to casual evil I've ever seen. I haven't encountered it, but my aunt's side of the family has two brothers that are corrupted policemen in China. While on his deathbed, the father's ankles were twisted in an attempt to get the inheritance money quicker. She doesn't talk to her brothers anymore and cut contact after the father passed. F those two, I hope some sick sadistic crap happens to them when they least expect it. I went to jail and prison for marijuana charges. There was this guy in there who had kidnapped, tortured, and raped two 12-year-old girls. This guy did a couple years and got released. He came back in a little after his release. He had gone to one of the girls' workplace, a fast food joint, and started harassing her, trying to touch her. Police came and arrested him there. This F did not care about the damage he did to these girls. And he had the most evil intents. He didn't want them to die. He just wanted them to hurt. He died in that jail under some dubious circumstances. What is the creepiest thing you've seen in the woods, or in the mountains, or in deserts, or caves, or in small towns, or in remote or rural areas, or while on large bodies of water, or while on an aircraft or a nautical vessel? I'd been at football training with a few of my cousins when I was about 10 years old. We decided to take a walk before our parents picked us up, so we went along the canal towpath. My cousin looked down in the canal and saw a really nice jacket floating along, and being a weird scavenger person decided to reach in to fish it out. Well, the jacket turned over. And so did the man wearing it. He also had no face left. Not gonna lie, that was rough. This took place in the Australian bush around 10:11 at night. I was 17, leading a staggered column of about 60 cadets to our detachment campsite. Due to light discipline rules, only myself at the very front of the group and the other flight commander at the rear had torches on. This was so that any vehicles coming along the trail could see us, and so that most of the cadets could maintain their night vision. We were camouflaged up and thus difficult to see at night. As we walked along, I periodically looked to my sides, and kept seeing what looked like dewdrops on the ground. Almost like tiny blue gems glinting in my torchlight either side of the road. I had to maintain my position in the formation, so I couldn't get a good look at what they were. However, after a while we stopped for a very brief break, and I took the opportunity to have a closer look. Walking over to the side of the trail, I spotted a small cluster of the diamonds and focused my head torch on them. Rather than seeing diamonds or dewdrops or anything remotely pleasant, I instead saw a group of about 5 large spiders just crouching in the leaf litter and staring at me. They looked like huntsmen's, which are about the size of an adult's hand. Sweeping my head around, I realized there were thousands of the things. All over the ground, some on the trunks of trees, and everywhere around me, glaring at the light affixed to my head. I had a very brisk walk back to the formation and attempted to play it cool while screaming in my head. Being a massive arachnophobe, I have no effing clue how I managed to set up a tent and spend the next week in that cursed forest. It's 2 a.m. We're in a tent in the woods in Maine. I'm about 8. Mom, there's something creeping around outside the tent. You're dreaming, go back to bed. Mom, there really is something out there. No, there isn't. Just then, something whaps on the side of the tent, hard enough to shake the whole thing. And my mother, who is entirely too god-darn tired to deal with this crap, sits bolt upright and whaps right back in the same spot. And from outside the tent, we hear, meow. Edit, it was a house cat. We didn't hear anything more the rest of the night. Your mom is metal. Felt like running at night last year because the park near where I live gets all pretty with the lights on in the dark. So after 5 minutes into the exercise, I feel the need to adjust my shoes because I forgot to wear a longer sock and they were hurting my ankle. I look up and I see this dark silhouette running towards me at full speed wearing a hoodie about 50 meters away. I was on the left side of the street and he was on the right, so it was clear he was running towards me. I legit almost crapped my pants and felt an adrenaline surge. I thought about fighting him if he got any closer, but in a blink of an eye, the person trips, falls face planted on the ground, and starts crawling in my effing direction again. F that, dude is committed, I'm leaving. I have a similar story. I was doing a paper route and a guy in a wheelchair appears out of nowhere at 3 a.m., just racing towards my car. We encountered him again about a week later. He did the same thing. Just hightailed it towards my car in his wheelchair, murder in his eyes. This took place like 2 streets over from our house. We floored it out of there and quit the paper route. Never seen him again. I was driving home after an extremely late night at work. I lived in the middle of nowhere. About a mile before I got there, a woman covered in blood jumped out of the woods into the middle of the road screaming. I panicked and went around her, then slammed on the brakes to help. Her boyfriend had beaten her and was currently chasing after her in the woods. I got her in my car and called the police. They met us at the hospital because I told them there was no way I was waiting on the side of the road when he was coming. Walking on the beach with my boyfriend, and we had walked to a giant rocky cliff to make out. Somebody was just gazing at the ocean, crying and shaking. Mind you, this is late at night, like around 9:30 p.m. We asked him if he was okay. He apologized and practically ran back down the cliff, away from the dangerous areas. My boyfriend and I watched him until he reached the public area and decided to call it a night. I'm pretty sure he was going to jump. You just might have saved that dude's life that night. In order to get back home from a popular kebab restaurant, I need to walk a short path through the woods. Along the way there is an extremely old abandoned partially collapsed chapel, and occasionally I'll stand there for a few seconds admiring it. It's quite beautiful in its own way. One day during winter season I decided to rest there for a minute, so I placed my kebab on the bench right next to the chapel and just stood there taking in the scenery. It was already rather dark and the woods were almost completely silent, but right as I was about to continue my walk I heard footsteps rapidly getting louder. It was a child running towards me, and as soon as it realized I was there it started to repeatedly scream, "Run, he is coming," or variations of that same sentiment. I was a bit perplexed by the situation, so I watched the child run past me without moving an inch myself. It didn't take another second for a much more weighty pair of footsteps to appear. I could make out a silhouette in the distance which seemed to be their origin, and at that exact point in time I got really scared. As opposed to running, I decided to hide in the chapel next to the altar, and after tripping over an old broken chapel bench I reached my hiding place. The footsteps got louder and louder, but right as they approached the vicinity of the chapel they suddenly went silent. About 15 seconds of complete quietness had passed just for the words, "Oi! You effing idiot left your kebab on the bench," to break the silence. Turns out it was a resident of the very same street I inhabit. His nephew was visiting and he wanted to race him to the kebab stand. I don't know whether this was the right place to post this. Ultimately this is more stupid than creepy. Best story here, emo. When I was about 7 or 8, my parents sent me to a local summer camp that they would pick me up from in the afternoons. I never really liked it because the kids were mean, everything was either broken or not clean, and the counselors obviously didn't care. I remember the girls' changing room had a door that led out to the woods, but the doorknob was gone, so it was unlocked all the time and you could see into it. This was primarily where the girls changed into their bathing suits, and there was usually someone blocking the view while we changed so the boys couldn't look in. Well, one day I'm changing alone and someone wasn't blocking the door. I look over and see an eye peeping in through the hole watching me change. I pull the rest of my clothes back on quickly and run out to tell my twin brother. I tell my dad that I don't want to go back to that camp anymore, and he begrudgingly takes us out of the camp pretty soon after because he knew how much we hated it. Years later, the camp has been closed down for many years and I'm asking my dad about it. He gets really grim and tells me it shut down because a 13-year-old boy had raped 7-year-old girl in the woods right behind the girl's bathroom, a few weeks after I had told him about someone watching me change. During a YMCA camp, 15 to 20 years ago, was around 11 to 13 at the time, we were camping in tents in a forest area. Was middle of summer so stayed light till around 10 p.m., 11 p.m. till it was fully dark. So we go on a night walk with the group, and are halfway into the forest when we notice someone definitely not belonging to our group following us. Camp leaders rushed us back to camp and put us into our tents with one leader staying up to watch us. Halfway through the night, wake up and have to pee like a madman. Get out of the tent to walk to the bathroom and see the leader supposed to watch as asleep in his chair by the campfire. Look around and see that the guy following us earlier has opened up and is peeking into one of the tents, while fumbling in a bag he has next to him. Screamed louder than I ever screamed in my life. Leaders wake up, jump the guy and hold him till the police arrive. Turns out he had a taser, blindfold, rope and several knives in his bag. That made me nearly pee myself. OMG, if you'd not awakened, can you imagine? Trust me, I've thought about it more than I can count. Pretty sure one or more of those boys would not be here anymore. I was a cook on board several NOAA research ships. Up in the Bering Sea, I saw what appeared to be a massive, black, triangular-shaped craft dive under the water. I viewed it from a distance of maybe 2 nautical miles. I was on a camping trip with some friends of mine and we found like 7 or 8 chipmunks and squirrels all in a pile, but they were all dead without arms or legs. When I was a kid, I used to live on a tiny property in the woods. My house was basically built around where stables were once. My room was, back when it was still stables, where the hay was stocked. Before getting to the creepy thing, I need to say some other stuff. When you were in my room you could sometimes smell hay out of nowhere. My dog was always refusing to go upstairs because something was scaring the crap out of it there. You could sometimes hear knocking on doors. There were 3 entrance doors in my house, sometimes all at once. Now that this have been said, we can go to the fun thing. So my room had a big window that gave a big view over the woods and my garden was basically a clearing. Once, I effing heard a kid giggling from upstairs. I ran there only to find my window open, and something running out in the woods. I spent 2 more years in this house and effing felt insecure the whole time. Small town in a relatively rural area. A few years after the fact, I'm now relatively certain it was a skinwalker. About 10 years ago, I was at my dad's house for the weekend in Kentucky. The Appalachian people are very superstitious, hailing from the Scots-Irish people and just never losing that side of them. My dad wasn't superstitious, I thought, and was not one to be easily scared. It was about, I dunno, 10 at night and we randomly decided to go into town to get some McDonald's. Daddy always insisted on walking in front of me and I always assumed it was so I wouldn't accidentally step on a snake, but now I don't think that's the case. So he turned on the porch light and opened the screen door. He had put 1 foot on the porch and there was this god-awful sound. I will never in my life forget it. There was a screech followed by the sound of a crow. But it wasn't a crow. The best way I can describe it is if a person was mimicking a crow call. My hair stood up on the back of my neck and my dad retreated into the house. He slammed the big door and locked it, something I had never seen him do. Before I could ask a question he said, "It isn't safe. We can go tomorrow morning." And so we did. But the rest of the night, we stayed inside. My dad didn't even go outside to smoke a cigarette. He even let the outside dog stay in the house. We never talked about that again, but that was one of the scariest moments of my life. Went walking in the woods while camping with an old boyfriend to where the road ended and found a giant underground cage. After exploring we started kissing and suddenly heard little kids giggling all around us. Hightailed it out of there and never looked back. Cowlitz River, Washington State. Camping with my dad and sister, me buddies, early 90s. Something was throwing rocks and sticks into our camp. We shined a flashlight out and caught a reflection of eyes and a silhouette. Very, very tall. Kept throwing stuff in our camp randomly for about 15 minutes. We just stoked the fire really high. In the morning I woke up to heavy footsteps in our camp and something reeked. Woke up my dad. He shook the tent and yelled. Whatever it was ran off. Human retinas don't reflect light back at night. That's a fun little fact I like sharing around the campfire. I was driving through rural parts of Missouri with a buddy. We drove down a single-lane road that had no exit. At the end of the road, there was a group of deer corpses laid in a perfect circle. I'd say there was at least 10 deer. We BTFO real quick. I've told this before and will stick with me till on my deathbed. Was a high schooler mid-90s. Went fishing off the coast of Corpus Christi with uncle and cousins. We were about 18 miles out. Been out all day. Was around 8 p.m. and were gearing up to head back in. It was before DST, so sun was already going down and getting dark. I was at the stern bringing in the traps. As I'm pulling it and I see this glow about 100 to 150 feet off. It's nothing I have ever seen. Best way I can describe it. It's like if you stuck a toaster underwater and the orange glowing elements were still working. But still not quite. And it was very large. We were on a 38 feet boat. All I can guess it was 5 to 6 times bigger. Kind of hard to judge sizes on open water. The water above it is not churning, but you can tell that it is disturbing it. I don't know, hard to explain. Almost like it was pushing the water up. This whole time I'm expecting something to break the surface and just froze. You know, like when you're walking the dog or something at night not really paying attention, and a cat or possum runs out. How you freeze and everything stops. I'm like that the whole time. Finally, I let out a call to my uncle. He comes around, stops right by me. He's not saying anything, just kind of like me. This thing, object or whatever the hell, just jets out towards the Gulf. I'm talking like not picking up speed. Instantly jets out. All I say is, "You seen that before?" My uncle just says, "Nope, let's go." I say absolutely nothing the way back and he doesn't either. My cousins ask us what happened. All my uncle says is nothing. Now what could it have been? I've researched it on and off for past 25 years. Especially when the internet came out. I've found a lot of people seeing something very similar. There is a naval base down there but no sub-bases we know about. It kind of took over my life for a lot of years. If we have something like that though, we've been holding out on technology that could change our lives. Super long story, TLDR, nearly got murdered backpacking in rural Tasmania. My boyfriend and I were backpacking through rural Tasmania a few years ago. While on a bus, we were discussing our plans for the ensuing 2 weeks. The girl in the seat in front turns around and offers us a place to stay in her town. We declined as we were headed elsewhere first, but she gave us her mobile number and said that she and her partner would love to have us. A few days later we decide to take them up on their offer. We call her, and she says they're happy to host us. So far so good. They meet us at the train station and immediately something feels off. It's really difficult to explain, but it's that kind of ineffable feeling in your guts that tells you that something isn't right. We ignored our guts and followed them. They lead us straight out of town. We ask them where we're going and they say that they live on the outskirts. This town is creepy as F. It's an old mining town that has been largely abandoned, and as we walk the 15 odd minutes to their home, the houses get crappier, with boarded up windows, overgrown gardens and no people in sight. Eventually we reach the house at the very end of the town. It's their house. We go in. Set up in the middle of the living room is a single mattress with a sheet hanging around it. They show us around the house except for one door which stays closed. When I asked what was behind it, they pretended not to hear. Our room has a made bed, chest of drawers, and looks like a normal room. It seems weird that they sleep on mattresses in the living room when they have a guest room. We go back into the living room and look around. Knives. A lot of knives. My boyfriend asks if they go hunting. No. The partner hands one of the knives to my boyfriend and asks him to open it. It's a massive effing Bowie knife with what looks like blood staining around the edges of the blade. My boyfriend laughs awkwardly and sets it down. They have a tattoo gun, to practice. My boyfriend asks if they have any tattoos. No. There's a small axe at the door. I ask if they collect wood. No. Suddenly the guy says he wants to go to the shops. We agree quickly because we're creeped out and want to get back into the town. The four of us leave and they start walking in the opposite direction to the town. I say that the town is back the other way. The guy says this way would be more interesting because it goes up through the trees. He says that they have never been up the mountain before, but he knows the area and it would take the same amount of time. I tell my boyfriend that I'm freaking out, but he thinks it's okay. We follow them into the trees. The path goes up the mountain. We are going in the total opposite direction of the town. The girl turns around to her partner and whispers, "So, where was the place again?" My boyfriend and I freeze. I say I want to take the road back to town and start walking. When the four of us arrive in the one shop in town, no one recognizes the couple. And this is a really small town. We make an excuse that we want to go look at sites and that we'll catch up with them later, and instead book a hotel room and freak out. I did some snooping on the area. Their house had an extra room, behind the mystery door, and a basement. The path that we were taking led straight out of town and up the mountain. There was no way it could loop back into town. So yeah, pretty sure we narrowly avoided being murdered. Or maybe they were just massive weirdos. To be honest, the creepiest thing was the fact that there was no drug paraphernalia at all. The state of the house and the weird behavior would have been understandable if they were intoxicated, but that wasn't the case. They were gonna kill your boyfriend and sell you as a prostitute. The tattoo gun is to mark you as their property, and the mattress is probably where you would have worked. Holy crap, I have never thought of this before. What's your best true spooky story? Serious. At the time I was around 14. I'd asked my dad to wake me up early that morning at about 5 a.m. because I had some work to get done. That morning, I was woken up, and I flung my legs over the side of my bed. I felt a tug on both of them. What I thought at the time was just my dad trying to get me to hurry up. I reached over to pick up my phone and turned it on, 3:30 a.m., and I looked over at the black figure I assumed was my dad, and it was gone. I've posted this on my other account. Copying and pasting it here. The scariest thing I've had happen while camping. So I live in Eastern Oregon, and my mom lives in Western Oregon. I went to visit her for the summer and she's very outdoorsy, so we decided to take the 1-hour drive from her city to the coast. We end up at this free campsite at the top of this hill, huge foothills of the coastal mountains, about a 25-minute drive from the top where the campsite is to the bottom where the main road was, and we were the only campers there. We relaxed for the rest of the day, made food, etc. A truck full of men drive up the hill and talk with my mom. I quit about, wasn't suspicious at the time, and they leave us. Fast forward to the middle of the night. I wake up to my mom sitting straight up in the tent. I wake easily, so I heard her gasp and it woke me. As soon as she saw I was awake, she put her hand over my mouth because I was starting to ask her what's wrong. It was dead silent, and all of a sudden you hear footsteps right beside the tent. The little flap that covers the zipper was even moving. Thankfully, my mom has quick wits and said very loudly, "Kenny, grab the gun." Kenny is my dad, although that doesn't matter, and mind you, he was not there, just us girls like I previously said. They left. No harm was done. Thank the Lord for my mama. 4 years ago, I lived in a very large farmhouse that was converted into 2 apartments. The house was known as the Old Boys' Home. It was used to house boys with behavioral issues but was closed due to allegations of molestation. Anyway, I was living with my boyfriend and 3-year-old daughter at the time. My bedroom had a large fireplace that had been boarded up and painted over. I decided to push my bed up against it one day while I was rearranging things. It was like a headboard. That night, around 1 a.m., I had heard a small voice saying, "Mom, Mom, Mommy." I had sat up in bed but didn't see anything, so I reached over my boyfriend trying to grab my daughter and put her in our bed. I kept feeling around, and I was still hearing the voice but I couldn't feel her. My boyfriend woke up and turned the bedside lamp on, asking me, "What the hell are you doing?" I explained that Amelia was trying to get in our bed and I was reaching for her. There was nobody there. My daughter was sound asleep in her room. Then the next night came. Around 1 a.m. again my dog had started to whimper at outdoor, so my boyfriend got up to take him outside. You know that feeling in a bed when someone lies down next to you? Where the bed pushes in and there is a warmth in your back? I felt that. So I assumed my boyfriend had come back to bed. I rolled over. My boyfriend wasn't in the bed and I felt the freaking bed release pressure. Whatever was laying next to me has gotten up in that second. I moved my bed the next day to the other side of the room and I never had another incident in the 2 years I remained in that house. When my grandparents bought their house for a family of 10, my grandpa found a fake wall upstairs. He tore it down to make more room for the family. Behind the wall were children's clothes and play toys, almost like they walked off the room in a hurry. My mom told me stories of sitting in her room and something circling the walls around her, sounding like wallpaper being torn. When she moved out, my aunt moved into the same room. She would wake up with pictures she hung up laying on her chest in the morning. My cousins also have stories of hearing footsteps coming up the stairs and stopping outside their door in the middle of the night. I still don't go upstairs at their house because it's always cold and I get weird vibes up there. Even in my adult life I have scary dreams that take place in their upstairs. I posted this in a thread a while ago but gonna do it again because it applies here. When I was in high school, my uncle would throw me a couple bucks to help babysit his kids with my aunt. They lived in a 2-story house by the water, nice area. The kids were about 3 and 6. One day I was sitting in their den on my phone, when I started to hear a baby crying. Thinking it was the 3-year-old, I headed to the bottom of the stairs to check and see if my aunt was up there dealing with it. I called for her a couple times with no response. The baby kept crying. I called for her one more time, and when I got no response I started walking up the stairs. Then I heard my cousins and aunt playing outside. All the hairs on my body stood up and I literally felt a chill run down my spine. I quietly turned around, walked down the stairs, got in my car and drove away. The baby was still crying when I closed the door behind me. A few years later I was drunk at a family party and told my uncle the story. He told me that he and his wife used to hear the baby too, and apparently the previous owners had a kid die of SIDS in that room upstairs. He's uber Catholic and had a mass said for the baby. He said after that it never happened again. Still gives me the willies when I talk about it though. Back when I was a kid my grandmother had a really close friend who used to help her babysit us. One day she goes missing. Family doesn't know where she is and we don't either. About a week later, police find her body in a dumpster. She had been dead for 4 to 5 days. She had been mugged and had several stab wounds. Incredibly tragic. Who would mug an old lady? Here's the spooky story. A few days just before she was found, my 3 cousins swore they saw her walking around in their backyard and knocking on their window. The following day had search going through the area. It wasn't until the body was found that we realized what they saw couldn't be true according to police timeline, but they swore it was her. I have a bunch, but I think the best one I have actually happened to my mom. We lived in a very creepy, very old house when I was little. One day my mom was cleaning my little brother's room while we were at school, and every single one of his electronic toys turned on all at once. 2 of them did not have batteries in them. She was so freaked out she had us camp out in the living room for 3 days because she didn't want my brother alone in his room. Up until we moved, that would occasionally happen. Either 1 or 2 toys at a time. Freshman year at my university. We had a creepy, old dorm on campus that no one was living in. Everyone generally avoided it because it just had an uncomfortable feeling when you got close to it and felt like you were being watched. There are rumored stories about 2 women dying there on separate occasions. 1 murder, 1 suicide. And they're the ones who haunt the building. One night, a friend was in a bad mood because his girlfriend had broken up with him, so I was walking around campus with him to let him get it off his chest and just trying to help him feel better. We walked past the dorm and I brought it up about it being haunted, and was telling him the stories to try and take his mind off it. So, the way the bottom floor was set up, there were 2 doors on both sides of the building, and the hallway ran the entire length of the building and you could see the other door. We walked up to one of the windows and were just looking down the hall when two girls walked out of a room, wearing clothes that looked like they were from the 70s/80s and stood there in the hall looking at each other, not speaking. Then, one girl slowly turned her head and looked straight at us, slowly turned her head back, then turned and walked the opposite way from us down the hall. So we ran to the other side of the building, but we couldn't find them. We came back to the original door and watched them do the same thing all over again. We looked at each other and ran. This freaked me out for a while, especially after, when I was sleeping in my room and all my posters fell off the wall at the same time. After telling this story to another friend, he convinced me to go back with him and try to find a way in. We found an open window, which we later found out was the room the girl hung herself in, and climbed in and started walking down the hall. We wandered around the building a bit and just started to notice generally creepy things. Water faucets started coming on, we'd walk through one room and then back through and a chair would be moved. On the first floor, a desk was turned upside down under the stairwell. As we were getting close to leaving, a lot more water faucets came on and kept getting louder and louder. Then when we got back to the room to go back out of the window, and as we put our hands on the window, the door slammed closed. So we ripped the door open, dove out and ran back to our dorm. And never went back. My high school used to be a giant mansion before it was converted into an orphanage and then a high school. One section of the school, the third floor, was inaccessible. The staircase which led to the floor was blocked off with wood and painted black to match the chorus room where it was located. In 2003, during the fall school show of Les Mis, they had to remove the wood so they could replace the windows on that third floor. We even ended up using some of the removed windows for our barricade. We had play practice most nights, and, if you lived far enough away, usually you would just stay at the school and wait, rather than go home just to come right back up. While waiting for practice to start one night, myself and three friends, Ryan, Mike, and Michelle, decided to go up the staircase to check out the third floor. The staircase was rotted and falling apart from years of disuse, so we carefully went up one at a time to find an unremarkable hallway with some even less remarkable rooms off to the sides. All of this led into a big open area with old, stacked desks and folders full of test papers from like the 80s or something. The four of us were a bit disappointed, because the rumor was that this section of the school was not converted from the orphanage that occupied the space several decades earlier, and the ghosts of orphans still haunted the place. Since we didn't get spooked, we ended up just digging through the old papers. While Michelle was looking through the papers in a side room with her back to us, Ryan pushed Mike and myself out of the room quietly and into an adjacent room to scare Michelle into thinking we disappeared. Sure enough, she comes bolting out of the room screaming at us, throwing out, "Screw you guys," and, "This isn't funny." We had to muffle our mouths to keep from laughing,